Hi, this is Ryan Neal from the USA offices of Neal's Saddlery and Harness Cowboy Sewing Machines and High-Tech Sewing Machines. We're going to continue our video series with video number 2, and in this video we're going to discuss how to adjust the thread tension on the sewing machine, and then we're also going to discuss how to wind a bobbin winder on the CB3200 sewing machine. So I'm going to have the camera pan in a little bit closer. I'm going to have the camera come in just a little bit closer here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the thread tensions on this particular machine. So to adjust the thread tension on this sewing machine, basically what we have is a two-piece tension assembly that's on the top side of the sewing machine. And basically what we have is the primary tension, which is down here. And the primary tension is called the primary tension because it's basically where most of the adjustment takes place on the tension mechanism for the machine. So this is why it's called the primary. Then we have the secondary tension assembly, which is up top. The secondary tension is where we also call this a pre-tension because it applies tension to the thread before it goes down to the primary tension assembly. The best analogy that I can think of between the relationship that exists between the top of the sewing machine and the bottom of the sewing machine in terms of thread tension is to describe things in terms of a tug-of-war. So basically, if you have too much thread tension on the top side of the sewing machine, that means the top of the sewing machine's winning, so that you would tend to see loops or nubbies that are on the top side of your material. If you have too little thread tension on the top side, then basically you're going to see loops or nubbies that would appear on the bottom side of your material. So that analogy usually works pretty well when you're trying to explain how to adjust the thread tension on the sewing machine. And I'm going to have the camera pan into my hands here. Basically what you're doing when you're sewing two pieces of leather together is that you're trying to get the stitch centered in between the two layers of leather. If this hand is one layer, this hand is another layer, you're trying to get the thread tension centered in between those two layers of leather. So if you see stitches or loops on the bottom side of the material, then that means the top thread tension is losing the battle, so you need to tighten the adjuster up here, and basically you're just going to turn this knob clockwise in order to increase the spring tension, and so that increases the top thread tension on the machine. Now if you were to happen to see loops on the top side of the material, then that means that the top side of the thread tension is too strong, so you need to back off a little bit on the thread tension to loosen it. So if you see loops or nubbies on the bottom side of the material, then that means you need to tighten the thread tension. If you see loops or nubbies on the top side of the material, then you need to loosen the thread tension. Whatever you loosen or tighten on the primary, you're going to do the secondary half again as much. So if you tighten the primary one full turn, then you're going to tighten the secondary a half a turn. If you tighten the primary a half a turn, then you're going to tighten the secondary a quarter turn, and vice versa. If you loosen the primary one full turn, you loosen the secondary a half a turn. If you loosen the primary a half a turn, you'll loosen the secondary a quarter of a turn. And so basically there's no cut and dry formula for determining what the thread tension is on the machine. You do want to make small incremental adjustments when you do it, particularly if you're sewing lightweight leather. If you're sewing extremely thin leather, then you're better off to do small incremental adjustments, maybe turn it a quarter turn at a time. If you're sewing heavier leather, you're going to make a more coarser adjustment. You're going to turn it maybe a half to one full turn at a time until you get the desired stitch appearance. But always remember, if you see stitches on the bottom, if you see nubbies or loops on the bottom side of the material, that means that you're going to want to tighten the top thread tension because the top of the sewing machine is losing. If you're seeing knots on the top side of the material, then that means that there's too much thread tension on the top side, so the top's winning and you need to loosen it up so that things balance out nice and evenly. So that's a rough overview on how to adjust the tension on this sewing machine. And again, there's no cut and dry formula. You just have to experiment. Usually what we recommend doing is sewing on a couple of pieces of leather that are the same as what your finished product is first, so you can get the thread tension dialed in. You want to use the same leather, the same consistency of leather, and then you can get everything dialed in. Then you can actually sew your finished project. So now what we're going to do is talk about how to adjust the bobbin tension on the sewing machine. And so what we're going to do here is, if you notice on the side of the sewing machine, and I'll have our camera come in just a little bit closer, on the side of the bobbin case right here, you'll see that there's a small screw right here. This screw is used to adjust, or loosen rather, this screw is used as a set screw that's used to hold the main screw in place on the sewing machine, which is this screw right here. This main screw is used to make your tension adjustment on the bobbin case area. But what you have to do on this is you have to loosen this screw before you make any adjustments on this screw underneath. So basically what we're going to do again, is loosen this screw. You don't have to remove the screw, just loosen the screw, and then that enables you to tighten or loosen this screw down here. Now generally, right now we're running a size 277 thread in the bobbin area for this sewing machine, or in the bobbin for this sewing machine. So what we want to do, if you make a dramatic increase or decrease in thread size, then we recommend changing the bobbin tension. Under most circumstances, you're never going to want to change the bobbin tension on this sewing machine. You're going to perform most of your adjustments up here on the primary and secondary tensions. Very seldom are you going to ever change the bobbin tension on the sewing machine, only when you make a dramatic change in thread size. For instance, if we went from a size 277 to a 138 thread, which is 2 sizes smaller, then we would need to make an adjustment on the tension. If we went from a size 277 to a 415, 2 sizes larger, we would need to make an adjustment on the bobbin tension, but very seldom do you have to adjust the bobbin tension on these sewing machines, only if you're making a dramatic change in thread size. So to give you an idea on how to do that, let's say that we went with a thread size that was 2 sizes smaller. Okay, so we went from a 277 down to a 138. If we went from a 277 to a 138, and when you think about it, it actually makes sense, and I'll have our camera come in a little bit closer here. You'll see on the side of the bobbin case, there's a small plate right here, and what happens is this plate presses against the side of the bobbin case. So if we have a smaller thread that we put inside the bobbin case area on the sewing, or in the bobbin of the sewing machine, then we would need to push this plate a little bit tighter in, because the smaller thread is a smaller diameter of thread. So we'd have to push this plate a little bit tighter against the bobbin case. So we would actually have to tighten this screw. So we're going to turn this screw clockwise. If we run a larger thread, that would be 2 sizes bigger. If we were running a 415 thread, then that thread is a larger diameter, so we need to have this plate pushed out just a little bit. So we need to loosen this screw so that it splits the distance between this plate and the bobbin case area on the sewing machine. So we loosen up the screw, and then that makes more of a gap so that you can fit that thread inside or so that you can fit that thread underneath the plate on the sewing machine. So that's a rough overview on how to adjust the bobbin tension on this sewing machine. And again, most of your adjustments are going to occur on the top side. It's not going to occur in the bobbin case area of the machine. After you're finished making adjustments on the bobbin case area, you definitely want to make sure that you tighten up this screw, this set screw holding the main adjuster screw in place. And then after that, of course, you're going to put the cover back on the sewing machine, because you don't want to get your fingers stuck in the bobbin case area of the sewing machine. Believe me when I say that's not a pleasant experience. So now what we're going to do is talk a little bit about how to wind the bobbin. And so what I'm going to have the camera do is come over here on this side. We'll have the camera come over here on this side, move over here on this side just a little bit closer. And then we're going to talk about how to wind the bobbin on the sewing machine. So when you wind the bobbin on the sewing machine, the first thing you always want to remember, if there is no material inside the machine, if there's no material in the machine, what you always want to do is remove the thread from the eye of the needle. So we're going to take the thread out. Now if you're sewing material in the machine, then what you can do is leave the needle threaded and just continue sewing. You can actually wind a bobbin on this sewing machine at the same time you're sewing. So that's generally not a problem, but you always want to make sure if there's no material in the sewing machine, you want to make sure that you remove the thread from the eye of the needle. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start to wind a bobbin, and I'm going to explain how to thread the bobbin winder on the sewing machine. So what we're going to do is take the thread as it comes off the thread stand, and we're going to put it through this hole right here on the little eyelet. And then on the little finger there, you'll see there's a little hole on the end of the finger. Then we're going to bring it around the back side of the tension discs, so that you can see here. And then what we're going to do is push it very tightly so it sandwiches between the discs. We don't bring it around 1.5 turns, or 1 turn, we just bring it around 3/4 of a turn. So now it's sandwiched very tightly between those discs. And then from there we're going to pull it up over the football shaped goal post that's right here. And then we're going to take our bobbin, and we're going to put the bobbin thread from the inside to the outside of the bobbin. We're going to go ahead and install the bobbin thread into the bobbin. And again, you're going to put it from the inside to the outside. And then from there, you'll see on the bobbin winder itself, there's a small nipple that sticks out at the base of the bobbin winder. We want the hole that's in the bobbin to line up with that nipple, and that nipple actually pinches the thread in place. And so it holds it in place, and then that way you don't have to worry about the thread slipping off the bobbin when you're winding it. There's also an adjustment on the bobbin winder. You'll see that the shaft is split off into 2 tines. You want the bobbin to fit very tightly on the splines of the shaft. And if for instance the bobbin fits loose, then all you have to do is take a screwdriver and bend the splines apart a little bit so it fits more tightly on the shaft. So we're going to go ahead and install the bobbin on the bobbin winder now. So I've got the thread through the hole from the inside to the outside. I'm going to go ahead and push the bobbin onto the shaft of the bobbin winder. I'm going to make sure that the little nipple lines up with the hole on the bobbin winder itself. Then from there we should be pretty well ready to wind a bobbin. So make sure that the thread's over the top post on the machine, or on the goal post on the bobbin winder. And then we're going to go ahead and start to wind a bobbin here. I have to push the bobbin winder forward to get it to engage, and then we're going to start winding. Now this little tail that's flapping around right now, you can go ahead and remove that just by snipping it off once the bobbin winder has started to wind. You can just go ahead and snip that tail off. And then we'll continue to wind a bobbin. You'll notice that the thread is moving across the bobbin from left to right, and now it's moving over to the right-hand side. And you can see that it's winding very evenly, and now it's moving back over to the right-hand side again. Now, there are some adjustments on this bobbin winder that we do need to discuss. You'll notice this little finger right here, this little finger mechanism. That's a kickoff finger, so that as the bobbin starts to fill with thread, it pushes downward, downward, downward on this finger, and then eventually it'll push on the finger enough to where it makes the bobbin winder disengage. You generally want these bobbins to fill within a 1/16th to a 32nd of an inch of the outer rim of the bobbin, so that if we were winding the thread, you would want it to appear about right here, a 1/16th to a 32nd of an inch from the outer rim of the bobbin when the bobbin thread is full, or when the bobbin is full. And so you can adjust this finger up or down so that it enables you to put it to within a 1/16th to a 32nd of an inch from the outer lip of that bobbin. There is also a feature on this bobbin winder that allows you to adjust the evenness of the wind of the bobbin. So for instance, if the thread was piling up on the right-hand side of the bobbin, you would want to go ahead and loosen this screw, and then you would move this entire finger and tension mechanism to the left if the thread were piling up on the right-hand side. If the thread were piling up on the left-hand side, you would want to move this finger and tension mechanism to the right. You can also take a pair of pliers sometimes and bend this to the left or to the right, this finger mechanism a little bit to get the desired wind. And ultimately the goal is you want the bobbin winder to fill evenly the whole way across, and you want the thread to be very tight on the bobbin winder, or very tight on the bobbin as it does wind. So that gives you a rough indication about what to look for. And again, winding a bobbin on this sewing machine is more of an art than it is a science, and of course you'll have to play around with it a little bit to get the desired features. We recommend winding 4 or 5 bobbins, doing nothing but winding 4 or 5 bobbins continuously on the machine to get the bobbin winder adjusted to where you want it to go. But again, just remember, you'll thread the bobbin winder through this eyelet right here, bring it around the bottom discs, up over top the football goal post, put it from the hole, put the hole that's in the bobbin, you'll thread it from the inside to the outside, and then you'll put it on the shaft of the bobbin, making sure that the finger that's at the base of the bobbin winder lines up with the hole on the bobbin itself. And then to engage the bobbin winder, you'll just simply push it forward, and then you can start the winding process. So this will give you a rough idea about how to wind a bobbin on this sewing machine. And now you can see the bobbin winder kicked off. Again, we would have to do a little bit of an adjustment on this to make sure that we would push this finger a little bit farther down this direction so the bobbin winder kicks off at the appropriate time. Right now we don't have enough thread on the bobbin winder to continue to do a full sewing cycle. So you would have to push this paddle down just a little bit. You can do that by either tightening this screw right here or actually just physically bending the paddle down if the bobbin winder disengages prematurely. If it fills up too much, then what you would do is bend this paddle up, or you would loosen this screw right here. So that gives you a rough idea about how to wind the bobbins on this sewing machine. So again, my name is Ryan Neal from the USA offices of Neal Saddlery and Harness Cowboy Sewing Machines. And this is a brief introductory video on how to adjust the thread tensions on the sewing machine as well as using the bobbin winder. If you have any additional questions on this, please feel free to contact me at area code 330-692-1418. And I do